Welcome to the Leap Health Workplace Podcast. Here we explore innovative, proven health and wellbeing solutions to drive your performance and productivity. Leap Health empowers individuals and organisations to prioritise their health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. We do this by providing workplace health and wellbeing performance workshops and also the Leap 360 one-to-one leadership coaching to drive health, wellbeing and performance, powered by the Game Changer Index Energy for Impact profiling tool. And we offer bespoke corporate programs to ignite proactivity in ownership at all levels of health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. Whether you're sat at your desk right now or on the move, get ready to listen, get ready to invest your time and take action straight after. I'm Anna Ready. Let's get ready to make small steps to leap health. Today is going to be a brilliant episode, and I was actually absolutely thrilled when our guest, Dr Maryhan, agreed to be on the podcast today. So I am joined by the world-renowned psychologist, podcaster, speaker and parenting expert, Dr Maryhan. Dr Maryhan's globally charting How Not to Screw Your Kids Up podcast has been named one of the top 5 parenting podcasts by The Guardian. Listened, loved and 5-star reviewed in over 60 countries, and I'm not surprised. It is fabulous. Dr Maryhan's superpower is her ability to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the issue. People know me, they know that I'm what you see, what you get, and you just get straight to the heart of things. Her practical approach has been hailed by parents, schools and organisations and earned her a reputation for straight talking, love that, non-judgmental, love that, real advice. And this is just why it made me think I've got to get Dr Maryhan on the podcast today. So as listeners and those that I've worked with will know, I talk a lot about positive noise and negative noise. And there's been so many times when other will have felt like when you just think, oh, I'm failing as a parent, what have I done? It's been one of those mornings and you've probably not been the parent that you aspire to be. But getting out for a jog, coupled by a bit of fresh air and listening to what one of Dr Maryhan's podcasts is just giving me that clarity and that comfort that I'm not a bad parent after all. We're all just doing the best we can do. But it's not just that comfort. She gives you some really sound advice that you can actually take away and action. And then what really grabbed me and gave me the nudge to get in touch with Dr Maryhan was a recent podcast I'd listened to. And I bet there's a few people listening to now that I'd listened to as well. And it was on a very famous podcast. A lady was talking about the damage that you do by putting your kids in daycare. And this really didn't sit right with me at all. I'm all for being there for your children and everything, but I just think this message could have landed in the wrong way with some people and this might be you right now, it could have left you feeling a little bit guilty, a bit confused. And Dr Maryhan has a really, really good slant on this. I'm not going to give it away just yet, so sit tight, and she's going to explore that very soon. So less of my Lancashire accent and more of Dr Maryhan. Let's dig into the podcast today. So welcome to the podcast, Dr Maryhan.
Oh, Anna, thank you so much. That's I hope I live up to that introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
I have every confidence you will do. Is there anything I missed there in that introduction?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, super. Let's get into the podcast then. So as you know, I work primarily in the corporate space with busy professionals. A lot of these are parents, and it can be really, really tricky navigating being a professional and being a parent as well. And I think whatever you do, you feel guilty, don't you? If you're at work too long, you feel guilty. And kids, if you're not working enough, you're not bringing enough income for them, and you're not giving everything to your job. So how can we overcome this battle of guilt constantly as a professional parent?
I think it's the first thing that I would say, it's about almost reframing it and getting comfortable with imperfection. I think it's this idea, we hear so much about this idea about having it all and being able to do everything. And the reality is that we can potentially do everything, but it comes at a cost. And it's not a cost as in we'll screw up our kids, but it's a cost in that there are only so many roles that we can perform tasks for without it beginning to be, but without our performance in some ways being compromised. So it's accepting that things will get messy and that life will be messy, and being okay with that. So instead of this idea about, work-life balance, thinking about it in terms of a counterbalance. If I'm working with a really big deadline to do with work at the moment, I have to accept the messiness that means that I'm not going to, whatever tick list that I've got in my head about being a perfect parent, be able to do all of those things, because it's just physically not possible. We might be able to do it for a period of time, but the wheels are going to fall off. So I think it's about being comfortable with that imperfection and then making sure that we safeguard ourselves to stay with that reframe. And that might be for some people staying off social platforms. It may be not having conversations with certain friends who are in a different situation and then make us feel guilty because we're not doing the baking the cakes or whatever it is that we're feeling. So it's that, it's that acceptance of parenting being messy, and just understanding that it's more about counterbalance, and then putting our safe rails in for those periods of time that we're probably going to be a little bit more vulnerable to that nagging voice that says that we're a rubbish parent and what are we doing and all the rest of it. Because parent guilt is the single driver that means that when we make decisions sometimes for our children about whether we say yes or no, whether we buy something or whether we don't buy something, when it comes from the place of guilt, it isn't always the optimal decision for our children or for us. So that's why I think we have to address this parental guilt rather than it driving our decisions.
Oh, so many things in that answer. That is just fab that I want to pull on. So that accepting imperfections is really, really important, isn't it? And I think I know myself, with 3 children, by the third one, I completely accept those imperfections. But I think it's really hard, isn't it, when you first become a parent as well, because it's that realization, isn't it, that you are going to have to let some things go. And I think accepting that. What I hear about you talking about, like, if you've got a big work deadline, I guess it's about that prioritization as well, and being clear on that. Sometimes blocking out some of the noise that maybe you don't want to hear at a certain time about maybe everyone else's perfection in their personal life is sometimes not positive noise, is it? Sometimes that negative noise as well. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, the bit I really loved is that decisions made upon guilt are not always logical decisions. They're maybe short term and not benefit you in the long term. So thank you so much for that. That was really valuable. So moving on from like thinking about, that guilt in everyday life, it can be hard, can't it, when you're a busy parent working as well, and maybe you're trying to get the kids out in the morning, you're trying to juggle and think of everything that you're doing. I described earlier on when I just need your podcast and your words of wisdom when it's been a frantic morning and kids are not listening. What can we actually do? Because often we have it clear in our head, the morning's going to seem calm, or the situation's going to seem calm, and then before you know it, you're like, it's all snowballed and it's out of control. So how can we numb that franticness?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say initially is about managing your own expectations of what leaving the house is going to look like, and that build yourself a bit of tolerance within that, because shit happens, stuff happens. Your child will forgotten something, or they'll be in a particularly bad mood, or they haven't had their breakfast, they haven't woken up at the right time. So I think part of it is about managing our expectations. But I do think that there's a huge amount that can be done around planning. And I don't mean planning from a place of micro managing our children, but simply, I'm a massive fan of this idea of a family meeting once a week at the weekend. And that is about simply reflecting on the week that has been, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and communication about the week ahead. So maybe for you as a parent, the mornings of them leaving the house is the most frantic time. We'll communicate that in advance when everyone's calm, when there's no stress, and just say, look, guys, I've noticed that the mornings get really stressful. I've noticed that I start getting really shouty. We always seem to be running late, trying to find things last minute. And let's have a conversation about how we might be able to make the mornings a little bit easier. And the reason why that's really good is there's multiple reasons. A, you're able to have that conversation when everybody's calm. And B, by getting your children engaged with that, this is the problem. How can we as a family resolve it? What things could we do? So we're encouraging them to problem solve, which is a fabulous skill as they move through life just generally, and they have a friendship problem or they've got a homework problem or whatever it might be. So we're having a conversation about this is a problem. I'm talking about it in an objective, unemotional way. I've just noticed that mornings are really particularly frantic. Can we as a family come up with a couple of things that we might want to commit to doing differently from next week? And then the week after, we'll do a bit of a review. So it becomes about working collectively. And then I think it's looking at any small hacks. You know, I remember a friend when my children were younger. She spoke a lot about the routine in her family was that the children had to put all of their school book bags had to be packed and in the car the night before. She found that was a massive hack. She had 4 children, so it was a pretty stressful morning, but she found that had a massive effect, positive effect, because that was one thing less that they had to stress about. Didn't mean that her mornings were always easy, but they managed to find a shortcut for one thing. So I think is such a big part, you know, planning in advance, communicating in an unemotional way and putting things in place.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. Sometimes doing it the night before when your mind's a bit calmer, because you haven't got all different things flying around. When you've got different things flying around, it takes far longer, doesn't it? And what you said around that collaboration, this is what we do as adults in the workplace, isn't it? And we assume that's the norm in the workplace. And this is, with kids, I think often we have these ways with adults, but don't translate that to children as well. So I think that collaboration, getting everyone involved, is a great suggestion. And along with that, you know, having that conversation when you're calm lands a lot better, doesn't it, than
Totally,
in the heat
totally.
of the moment. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Why though? Then going back to this frantic situation, why is it sometimes that you feel like you're telling your kids to do things over and over again? And that phrase that we've probably all heard from our parents as well, I sound like a broken record. But why is it that sometimes you just keep asking them and they just don't do anything?
Let me tell you a secret that I think is probably one of the main reasons why this particularly happens. And I think it is children tune out. So what happens is there'll be different rules, well, not different rules, there'll be different sort of dynamics within every single family, but children simply tune out. So in a family, mine particularly, I'm a control enthusiast. I loved it when my children were super young because they just basically did what I told them when I wanted them. And as they got older, it became obviously much more problematic because they have a mind of their own, and then we've got to step up to being more collaborative. But fundamentally, our children get used to this notion of mum or dad or mum and dad ask me something. I don't have to do it straight away. So I know that they're going to ask me once, twice, 3, 4th time, and by the 5th they'll then shout, and that's when I act. So that we've almost kind of trained them and programmed them into this notion of what happens. So, and what typically happens is that we use too many words when we ask them to do something. We get all emotional and we drag in whole other things like, how many times do I have to tell you every single morning you don't get your shoes on? How many times have I told you to do? And we launch into this long tirade. No judgment, we all do it. Whereas actually, if we kept it short and sharp, shoes on, we're going. What happens is they don't have to look for the signal, the instruction amongst all of the noise. So I think that's part of it. And part of it is that we haven't communicated and been really clear about our expectation and then followed through with any natural consequences that might occur or that we might have within our family around what happens if we don't get ready and we don't go out or we don't go up to bed, or we don't come off our tech, or whatever it is, the instruction that we feel falls on deaf ears.
You're so right. You're so right. And the way you describe it, of just that nagging, 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 it does make sense that they're going to zone out. You said as well, like you gave an example of being a bit more sharper, like shoes on. Would you advise giving them that pre-warning? You know, in 5 minutes, I'm going to want you to put your shoes on, or do you think that noise is numbed out and you're better just going in there with the direct what you want to do?
No, I think, I mean, you can tell I'm obviously a bit of a planning person, but I think it really helps. So if the night before, it's that reminder, right, guys, remember tomorrow we've actually got a really swift finish, because swift get out in the morning, because you remember you need to be in school for this particular breakfast club, or I've got to be at this particular meeting, so we're leaving super early. Can you remember, guys, what we've agreed? So you get them to tell you what's been agreed about timings and what's going to happen and how we're going to do. And then if you have a child who needs a bit of like pre-warning, so you've got 5 minutes, guys, we're going to be leaving, then agree it the night before. So if that is that what we're going to do? And so what then happens is there aren't any surprises the next day. It's like, remember, right, okay, we're on our, this is what we need to do. We need to be out the door by 7:30, 7:25, giving you guys 5-minute warning. What do you need to do? So the more we can sort of revert to them, children are much more likely to do what they have said. What happens is we do all of the talking. You need to do this, we need to leave at this, and sometimes even over our backs because we're so busy grabbing stuff and doing things. If our children say the night before, this is what needs to happen. If our children say, when we give them 5-minute warning, what does that mean you need to do, guys? Then they're much more likely to do it. And then we're less frazzled.
Yeah. And I think actually we frazzle ourselves, don't we, as well? We can zone out of our own voice as well from saying the same old thing over and over again. So I think that's super, that, you know, discussing it the night before and preparing them for it. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, because when you opened up the answer to this question, you said how the difference between young children and older children. And I've certainly found this, having a teenager and a young one as well. You think it's hard with a young one, don't you? But actually, like you said, there are, you know, many times more receptive to what you say. Teenagers, there can sometimes be no logic, can there? How would you differ those kind of instructions or things with a younger child and a teenager?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have to remember, and I would certainly say this in terms of my own personal experience, and is that fundamentally when our children are younger, the power dynamic can work highly effectively. You know, our role is to keep our children safe. That is our fundamental role, as well as then help raise them to be these resilient adults, fully functioning in the adult world. When they're younger, we've got a very clear power dynamic of us creating boundaries within which that they need to operate, but very clear instructions. You know, this is bedtime, it's about keeping them safe. What happens is, I find with the teen years, is that we have to remember that we have to shift the power dynamic. So no longer is it we have the power as the adult as such, and this is what you need to do, but it needs to be much more collaboratively. I like the collaborative even with young children, but there are some things that fundamentally you need an app and that's going to happen type of thing. But with young adults, and it starts earlier than we think. So, you know, this whole idea of I wait till their 12th birthday because I know they're going to be 13. For some, we're seeing puberty in some children, and this is unusual, but we are seeing some young girls going through puberty at 8. So we have to remember that there is a lot changing. So what we then do is we move to a collaborative adult to adult type conversation where we acknowledge, and, you know, I get it. The last thing you want is me constantly nagging you to tidy up your bedroom and to get this. I really get it. But we have to, there are certain things that we value within this family. There are certain things that we have to be able to do. Let's work together here. So the conversation is much more around that acknowledgement of their need for independence and to pull away from us more, whilst also still having, even though they don't communicate it, a very strong desire and need to then still be young. So we just have to have that dynamic is different in terms of how we speak to them.
Yeah. And would you say more with older children, you've got to let them fail a little bit sometimes to, we all know that if we don't fail, we don't learn from any failures. That's the biggest way we can learn. But as a parent, it's hard sometimes, isn't it, to let them fail? I know I've had it with one of my daughters a couple of years ago, who plays football quite a lot and was up late, not going to sleep. I was like, well, just look at how you perform the next day. And it does, the penny does seem to have dropped because I've just let her do that. But there's lots of situations in there when we think, no, we've got to have control because we know the best thing. But what are your thoughts on allowing them to fail?
Yeah, definitely. And I even think really young children as well. I think fundamentally children learn through experience. They're experiential learners. And if you've got a headstrong, strong-willed, stubborn, whatever you might label them, child, in lots of ways, they need it even more. And I think, just take the classic, a child who doesn't want to put their coat on and we're trying to go out, a young child. They can learn natural consequences. Okay, you don't want to take your coat, don't take your coat. And then it rains or they feel cold. And that's not us being punitive as parents, but for some children, experiencing that natural consequence then, solidifies their understanding and their experience. And it's like, right, okay. And that's why, because let's think, as parents, we're often telling our children, go to the loo before you go, make sure you've got a coat, make sure. And a lot of it is just like, oh, it's noise. My parents banging on again, again, again. And until they've actually experienced it, they don't realize. And I'm not suggesting that parents do this, but I always say a child never fully understands how to cross a road safely until they've nearly been run over. Because this whole look left and right and then look left again, they don't realize it's noise. They hold our hands doing it, but it's only when they realize when they've stepped out, oh, that's the reason why I look again, is because actually cars come really quickly. So I think we can extrapolate that for so many things.
Yeah. I think that even like stepping into the road, that's a lot, I guess, to do with your stress response, isn't it? That's a really sharp, acute stress response when you see that thing, and that's probably going to stay with you more than the parent saying, "Hold my hand," and yeah, go across the road. Thank you. So sticking, probably this is more relevant for older kids as well, but I know the older they get, the more demanding they get in terms of what they want financially, and they're trying to keep up with their peers. This can be quite a stress as well for parents that are working and want to be present with the children, but also feel like they've got that financial guilt as well. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier on, but how do you think we manage that when we're in a world of social media and everyone's got everything? And how do we manage those expectations?
And I think that's a really great question, because it's something that we as parents are dealing with much more than maybe even 5 years ago. Everything is about, quite often, about the outside labels of things and about possession. And I think that with social platforms, particularly, not trying to demonize it, but so much of our world is about getting things immediately, immediate response. You hear lots of young people, I've sent a message and I've been left on read. And it's just like, but just they don't have to respond instantly. But in lots of ways, they've almost kind of learnt and almost been programmed to this notion that everything comes instantly. So it can be difficult. And I think that this is where the parental guilt often comes in, because if we're feeling that we're working a lot and we're not present and our children want a thing, whatever that might be, whether it's a particular trainer, whether it's a particular gaming console, the parental guilt drives a decision of, I feel really bad, I've not been around. This is really clearly really super important to my child, and therefore I will then buy it. And so I think we have to ask ourselves that question around, is this something, would I say yes to this if I wasn't feeling guilty about the work? Is this a decision, if in any other circumstance would I agree to? And I think that helps us make that active decision about, okay, I'm making a decision to say yes here out of guilt. And I also think it's about our role fundamentally, yes, to keep our children safe, but then the next piece is about making sure that we have a fully functioning, paid up adult, a resilient adult. And it's asking ourselves, Is this helpful to my child if whenever they ask for something, they get it? Is it, or it's a particular branded thing, or I stretch myself financially as a parent in order to make sure that my children can have these things, which means I'm then caught in this whole vicious cycle of I have to work more, therefore to make enough money, and then I feel guilty. Patience is a really, and deferring, satisfaction is a huge part of being able to function really well as an adult. We're not going to get a promotion every time we ask for a promotion. We're not going to get the job every single time. We can't have things necessarily. And so I think having those conversations with our children about that patience, and fundamentally children, if we are overworking, if we're feeling that we're not present, the best way we can give them our presence is, and it's not about quantity, it's not about hours and hours of time, but it's about that real genuine, I'm looking you in the eye, I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm trying to understand your world. If you've got a child who is on social platforms, show me the stuff that you're watching and that you're interested in. Tell me about it. Let me show you that I'm really listening by me paraphrasing back what I think, so you like following that person because they've got these great dance things that you like to then do, or it lifts you up, or it gives you more confidence, or it gives you tips. I think that matters much more. I'm not suggesting it's not difficult. It's really, really hard. But when we focus on this idea of, patience and working towards things, if our children really want things, maybe we can come up with some agreement where we do 50-50. You earn some extra money. I pay, whatever you raise, I match it. I pay half. There is something, and particularly if you're a parent who have bought your children things and you feel that they don't understand the value of it, they don't treat it respectfully, they're much more likely to do that if they've made a significant contribution themselves.
There's lots of points there that have really resonated with me, and I'm like, writing down I need to do. And I was thinking, you can think that your children are really spoiled, can't you, sometimes? But actually, that's probably because as parents, they haven't got that perceived value that they need to have on things because they haven't had to wait for them. And then I love how you said we're creating resilient adults. So actually, I always talk a lot about short-term benefit, long-term gain. Just getting them something in the moment is a short-term benefit, isn't it? It's not going to develop them into that resilient, hard-working adult. And there's like common themes here, isn't it? You were saying when you want kids to do things, it's got to be a collaborative decision. Like you said, if they're paying for half of it or contributing to it, it's a collaboration, isn't it? They're invested in it, which is really important. Do you know what? There's one other thing that you said, that really hit home when you said, pick up, look at what they're looking on social media. I too often go, I'm not even interested. I don't want to listen to that nonsense. So I'm going to change my wording around that. Thank you.
It makes such a difference to them because it's about us genuinely trying to meet them where they're at. We don't have to, it's the same with gaming. I remember my children, I really have never, ever, I'm 56. So I remember the grandstand game console that my father bought us, which was basically things that pinged up and down and then you kind of pinged a ball. I'm not someone who likes to game, but it was a real effort to sit with my children, say, explain to me what this particular game is that you're playing. Let me understand why it's important to you. It's not important to me, not something I would choose to spend my time with, but you clearly value it. And my job as your parent, because this is something that is really important to you, is to understand it.
Yeah. And I think that's harder than we actually realise, but it is. You've got to get on their level and get curious with what they're doing. And even though if, I'll be biting my tongue when they're showing me some wonderful mummy who has 20 odd kids and the house is spotless and going on, and I'm thinking, well, it's not real. I've got to bite my tongue.
And it is. And I would say the only other caveat with that is when we do that is to not judge. Because we're asking them to show us their world and what they're interested in. If we judge, they're not going to show us again.
Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. And this is, why I love your work, because it's totally non-judgmental. I'm going to make a sidetrack here as well. If no one's seen Dr Maryhan as well, she's just said she's 56. She looks about 36. So must be doing something right with the parenting because her kids haven't frazzled her the way they frazzled me. So anyway, just a side note there. So I did say in the introduction, one of the reasons, what had really made my ears prick up when I listened to one of Dr. Maryhan's episodes was around an episode on another famous podcast where a lady was talking about the detrimental impact of leaving your kids in daycare. I think there's two sides of this, and as I said, I was just left a little bit uneasy with how it's landed with some parents. If it had landed at the wrong moment, it could have left them feeling really bad. And just something else to add to that is that in contrast, like during the pandemic, when kids weren't in schools and weren't in daycare as much, we saw a spike in neglect to children as well. So what are your thoughts, Marion? What's your expertise in this area? How have you taken this?
You know what? That episode absolutely, genuinely had me massively raw. I was so angry when I listened to it. And within a couple of days, I think, of listening to it, I was delivering a talk at a corporate client where one of the parents came up to me afterwards. She'd just returned back to work from maternity leave and was riddled with concern that she was basically going to end up screwing her kid because she was back at work. So, I mean, obviously, extreme statements always cause me great concern. And I think I like to I sat with it a little bit because obviously for me to get that angry, it's important that we reflect on our feelings. Is this triggering something in me because I feel that I might have done X, Y, or Z? And I think what I would say is that this particular speaker was talking about is basically using attachment theory. So these early attachments. So the idea is, just very broadly speaking, is that children form an attachment around about 8 months. And that attachment is a crucial predictor of their later functioning in terms of life. And that can be not only their sort of social and emotional relationships, but can also be intellectual as well. So there is very clear evidence that it's really important that a child forms an attachment. And we see that with children who may well be taken into care systems or who are in war-torn countries. If that doesn't happen, it does have an impact. But this is not happening to parents on a day-to-day basis. So most of our children, 70% of children, have a secure attachment. And it's about meeting a child's emotional needs, being responsive to a child's emotional needs. And that is fundamentally what it's about. So for me, it's about quality and not quantity. And this is what drove a whole generation of women to stay at home because they felt guilty and were staying at home because they thought that was the right thing. But what filled them was their work and career, and they were not doing that. So it is about making sure that when we are having time with our children, that it is quality. And I'm not talking about earmarking 30 minutes that we call quality time. Quality time is, am I looking my child in the eye? Am I responding to them emotionally? Am I responding to their emotional needs? Am I actively listening to them, genuinely listening to hear what they're saying rather than listening because I've got 6 million other jobs that I need to do once I've had this structured 30-minute time with them? So I think that is the big part. And when we then extrapolate that to daycare, we could argue that in some extreme cases of poor daycare, that would have a detrimental effect because our children wouldn't get that eye contact, that quality time, and that meeting their emotional needs. But let's face it, those daycare those sort of situations are probably already under some form of review anyway. And it's not what we're doing as parents, which is why it upset me so much, because I think it's hard enough as it is as a parent. There is so much guilt around the decisions that we make. And for some, there is a genuine choice. Genuine as in, I'm choosing to go back to work because the reason why I'm working and putting my child in any form of daycare is for my own enrichment. There's no financial need to do it. I'm doing it because I want to. But a lot of people are not in that situation and actually are going back to work because there's a bit of both. I love what I do, but I also have a mortgage that I need to pay. I've got certain costs that are not going to happen and are not going to be able to be covered if I don't. So I think if listeners take one thing away from this, it is about the quality, not the quantity. Please do not feel that you are going to screw up your kids. There's lots of campaigns out there. The Princess of Wales has got a big campaign for those 0 to 5 years being like super crucial. But fundamentally, a child's brain remains plastic. It's at its most plastic 0 to 5, but it is plastic until about 23, 24. And then it still continues to be plastic, even at our age, even at 56. I could learn to fly a helicopter if I wanted to. It would just take me longer than it would do an 18-year-old. But I can still do that. So don't feel that if you're not doing this thing at 0 to 5, that you're somehow screwing up your kids. Because there's lots of then, people who are then saying, actually, we should be staying at home for our children when they're in their teen years. So it's about staying true to, I'm giving you quality, I'm listening to you, and I'm giving you that time rather than being guilted into feeling that you're doing a poor job.
Wow, I bet that's given so many people so much comfort and confidence in what they're doing.
So.
Yeah, you should have been on that podcast instead. But yeah, I love all the points that you've come out with there. And it's we all need to feel purposeful, don't we, in life? We all need to feel like we're creating an impact, and probably being able to do that enables us to be better parents as well. And it's just about still showing your kids love and just making sure that they know they're loved and that you're there for them. And I love that it's about the quality over quantity. And times have changed, even when I speak about well-being in the workplace. And I think back to when I was a kid, it wasn't the norm for mums to go to the gym, was it? It wasn't the norm for mums to train. That's part of my life every day, and that's something that is non-negotiable because it makes me a better mum. So I think some things have to be non-negotiable, and you don't feel guilty for them. And equally, we want to be role models for our kids as well. We want our kids to think, what did our parents achieve? And I think we've got to look wider. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to add another question in now as well, because you kind of touched on that guilt as well around being a parent. And it really worries me at the moment, because everyone you hear, I listen to zillions of podcasts, but everyone in this story says it was all about my upbringing. And I think this puts so much pressure on parents. I'm constantly thinking, what if I've done something wrong now? And they're going to be that child that's saying, oh, my mum or dad didn't do this right. I just feel like there's so much blame on parents, and rightly so in some situations. Yeah. But what is your take on that as well?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because I think there's been this idea of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, was always pretty much kept in the realms, of war veterans, basically. Seen active service, you've seen things that have really traumatized them, and they would bring that back with them. And now, of course, there are more diagnoses for PTSD with young children, or this notion of big T for big trauma and little t for little trauma. I think I don't want to diminish any individual's experience, but I do think what's important is that we try to reframe how that experience has taken place, because Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot, and I'm a huge fan of his, is this idea that it's the stories that we tell ourselves about a situation that has happened that is often so far removed from what actually did. So, of course, my children will often joke, my daughter would joke that I traumatized her by all the garden centres I used to take her to, or I traumatized her by giving away some of her model cars before she was ready to let them go. So I do think that there are certain things that we do that sit with our children in lots of ways, but it's the stories that they continue to tell themselves about what that did for them and what that did to them that ends up, I believe, causing more of the issues, in the same way as us as adults when we reflect. And I think in lots of ways, that's probably what's made us so much more concerned and aware, is that we've reflected on how our parents parented us, and like, oh my God, that screwed me up because my parents were authoritarian, or they made me do this camp and it really traumatized me. So we then are almost projecting that then onto our children. Goodness me, what might happen? How might I screw them up? So I do think it's that understanding that it's the story that gets told that creates more of it. So if our children are experiencing challenges and difficulties, it's important that we begin that discussion either within our family quickly to acknowledge that that's their experience and helping them unpick it, or help them seek some form of professional help, so that what it doesn't what we want to avoid is it becomes their story. It becomes a permanent part of who they are, and it limits them in any way.
Yeah, because I guess that's when there's lots of the plasticity in the brain going on when they're creating those stories, and the older you get, it's harder to change those neurons in your brain that are fixated in different things. And I think, like you said as well, I love that it's a story that you tell, because you see siblings, don't you, that have been through very much the same situations, and yet it's manifested in very different ways. Some have really captured that situation and turned it into a positive and been hugely successful and driven to overcome it, whereas others, maybe they've crumbled. So yeah, thank you. That's just a point I think I hear lots of people worrying about, and I think is a big concern for many parents. We've kind of touched on screen time, haven't we, a little bit earlier on. I've got on my list of things that I just wanted to ask you, because there's so many things I want to ask you, Dr Maryhan. So many things, and I'm conscious that you don't want to be sat here all day. Is there anything I've missed around screen time that you think our listeners need to know and you want to get off your chest and tell them?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Children are much more likely to do what they see than what we say. So I think we have to, before we start laying into our children about the amount of screen time that they're on, I think we need to reflect on how often we're on ours. We had as a family a bit of what we used to call a show and tell on a Sunday, which was literally devices out. Let's look at what was your total screen time. It depends. I mean, obviously we use Apple devices, but you can get them on Android. Just simply tells you how long you've been on using devices, because we do it so self-conscious without realizing it that we're picking it up. So that's the first thing that I would say, is about communicate that regularly, not in a not judgmental way, but just simply be aware that if you are on your phone, as my children would always say, "Oh, mummy, you're always checking your work emails," because I'd be telling them off, "Get off your phone, you're always on your phone." It's like, you're always checking work emails. So I think that would be it. And the other thing that I would say is, and this touches on a little bit around, why we potentially saw more neglect during COVID, is that I'm not having a discussion about people working from home, but fundamentally more of us are working from home. There is a very blurred boundary between when we're parenting and when we're working. And so we are on our devices much more, because we could genuinely be checking work emails instead of it being 9 to 5 or 8 till 6 or whatever it was that we were doing it. We're sort of carving out portions of our work day in order to be present for our children, but then we're picking up the work again later on. To our children, they are not categorizing, and they're not saying, "Oh, my parents are now back in work mode, so I ignore them on they're just simply saying, "You're on your phone all the time." And so it becomes very easy for them to be on theirs. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think those boundaries, what I'm hearing is it's creating those clear boundaries. I love that show and tell around screen time as well. I love that. Yeah, and going back to parents, like maybe switching off to do things with the kids and you're back on your work emails later on. I find it quite frustrating when people think I'll ping a load of emails, which gets it off my list to do late at night, but don't always realise it's landed on someone else's list, which then could be distracting them from the kids as well. So always try whenever I can to use like a schedule button for the next morning.
I was just going to say, to schedule, and particularly, I mean, what I've seen, maybe I'm being a bit funny about this, but I've also seen some people message and then put this whole, appreciate that everyone works different times and at different sort of things, so just read it whenever. Human instinct is, I've got a little red mark on my email list that says I've got X number of unread messages. So let's be kind to each other. Let's schedule it or write it and keep it in drafts and then send it. It's still off your list. The only thing you need to do is press send in the morning.
Yeah, that's a bit like saying to a kid, isn't it? There's something there, don't look at it. It's a surprise what they're going to do. Yeah, so just think like going back to that, boundaries being mixed up, and it can be very easily that all that stress of work builds up. I'm going to move on to the topic of burnout, which is something I discuss quite a lot. But what do you think are the non-negotiables that parents can do to avoid that burnout at home and at work, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very simple tool that I use that will help with this, and it's this no, and this applies for children as well as it does for adults. We've all got a bucket, and that bucket fills throughout the day. And we usually don't notice that we're at capacity until that final drop comes in and we're burnt out, or we're frazzled, or we snap at somebody. We respond in a disproportionate way. So part of it is being aware of what fills our bucket, and what fills my bucket will be different to yours, Anna, but also the proportion. So some people, for example, I love my sleep. I have never had problems with my sleep. But if I don't sleep very well, that will fill probably half of my bucket. Whereas someone else who probably always had a bit of erratic sleep, or can function really well on not very much sleep, if they don't have a great night's sleep, might only fill it a little bit. So it's understanding what fills your bucket and in what proportion. And then it's about understanding that our bucket can be emptied only one way, but we think it can be emptied another way. So if you imagine there are two taps, one tap genuinely takes the water away. The other tap simply has a hose that goes straight back into the bucket. So for example, these are the things that we think are emptying our bucket that aren't. Scrolling mindlessly on social media does not empty your bucket. Having a glass of wine or your favorite drink does not empty your bucket. Mindless watching television doesn't empty your bucket. Doesn't mean that you can't do those, but don't have a super stressful day, put your children to bed, and then think, right, glass of wine, watch my favorite box set. Excellent, I've now decompressed, because you haven't. It's factoring those into the things that genuinely empty your bucket, which might be, not necessarily this, having conversations with friends, going out, talking to somebody, journaling, exercise. It's all different for all of us. Maybe you love doing a bit of sketching, doing a jigsaw puzzle. Maybe you love Sudoku, or a word search, or reading, or having a leisurely bath. It's things that allow you to genuinely process what's happened. So if we're trying to look at avoiding burnout, it's simply make a commitment to doing one thing that for you empties your bucket. Do it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even if it's just simply do some breathing exercises when you put the kettle on to make yourself a cup of tea. It doesn't have to take over your life. This is not big, huge, arduous practices. It's just a net effect. It's like, can I make sure that I empty that my bucket doesn't overflow, even if it's only a millimeter from overflowing? Make a commitment to do that one thing.
So much sense there, yeah. And I love about it's all those small little things, isn't it? And again, that's probably going back to what you said at the beginning. It's letting go of all those perfections. So if you always thought it was an hour in the gym, just let go of that. It's busy. Just what are the small little things you can do, and the different types of hoses that you described going out, again, I think relate to those short-term benefits and long-term gains as well, in terms of what you're doing. In terms of those things that really benefit you. Something came to my mind the other morning when I was out running, and I just thought, we've all got a unique antidepressant built into us. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone knew what is their unique that is built into us, was designed in us uniquely, that helps us reduce our stress, and is a bit like our own inbuilt antidepressant. And for some people, for myself, certainly running, some people it's singing, some people it's, but it's just really knowing, like you said, what's unique to you that's going to really help. So yeah, thank you. We're coming to a close now, and I'm so many more questions I want to ask you, but we are going to come to a close. Your time is precious. What would you like to see change in the corporate world to make it a nicer place for professional parents?
I think for me, it's as simple as just basically seeing parenting as a skill, as a strength, and not something that needs to be accommodated. Like, oh, we've got to accommodate because you're a parent, therefore we need to have all of these things in place. It is a strength. Parents are incredible at time management, prioritization, juggling multiple things. And actually, rather than seeing it as we need to make some accommodations because they're a parent and so they can't do the job in the same way as someone who isn't a parent, is actually how can we use those skill sets in a positive way? It's about communication and collaboration. The collaboration that you genuinely, and the conflict resolution those skills that you learn on the job as a parent, because it's all experiential, are hugely beneficial for the corporate world. So I think it's shifting the framing of parenting and seeing it as a strength and not seeing it as something that needs to be accommodated.
Super, yeah. It's just like all those transferable skills, isn't it? And seeing it in that mindset, that way. So you've given us so much to think about, and so many, as I said at the beginning, practical, actionable steps in real talking terms, which I just love. Where can people find out more about it? So I know we've spoken about your podcast, but you also work with a lot of young people who are feeling anxious or maybe have special needs, to give them that confidence to be the unique self and embrace being the unique self. So where can people find out more about you, and just tell me a bit more about the work that you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, the work that I do is kind of two bits. There's the sort of the education piece, which is the podcast and the talks that I give in schools and corporates. But then there's also the practical supporting young people and families. And all of that can be found on my website. So drmaryhan.com. And then you can find there's links to the podcast there. There's links to a whole host of other things. So yeah, if you want to connect, I'm not on social, so you will not find me on any social platforms, but you will find me on LinkedIn. That was intentional because I didn't feel that I could continue saying to young people who were feeling anxious to take a bit of a digital detox when I was actively on there myself. No judgment of anyone else that's on it, but for me, I sort of came off about 5 years ago, and it's been perfect, amazing.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a different kind of approach, isn't it, in social media, which I also favour. This just leads me to say a huge thank you for all your valuable, insightful information that you've given us all, and I will put all your details in the show notes as well, so please do reach out to Dr Maryhan, and it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, Anna, thank you so much for having me.
So before you stop listening, I want you to pause. What did you take away from the podcast today? What small steps will you start? And what did you hear that you know could help someone else to make small steps to lead their health, well-being, productivity and performance? Please do share this episode, and please subscribe to the podcast. And remember that Leap Health are here to provide workplace health, well-being and performance workshops, one-to-one coaching and bespoke corporate solutions to help the world make small steps to leap health, well-being, productivity and performance. Please do get in touch. It's Anna at leaphealth.co.uk. Have a great day.